TIFU by trying to impress my new girlfriend with my cooking skills, but it ended up with a fire, a trip to the ER, and my reputation as a culinary genius absolutely destroyed. So here's the situation. I recently started dating this incredible woman. Let's call her Sarah. We've been seeing each other for a few weeks now, and I wanted to do something special for her. The whole dinner date thing seemed a bit overdone, and I figured that cooking for her at my place would show her a more personal side of me. Plus, I was pretty confident in my culinary abilities, so I thought I was making a pretty solid move. Now, I'm not some amateur when it comes to the kitchen. I've dabbled in cooking for years, and I can make a few dishes that are actually pretty impressive. I'm not talking gourmet stuff, but I can cook a mean pasta, whip up some nice steaks, or even bake a cake from scratch. But I wanted to take it up a notch this time. I had the idea to make a 3-course meal, and to really show off, I decided to make a dish that I'd seen in a cooking show that seemed pretty easy. Beef Wellington. Yes, you heard that right, beef Wellington. The dish that requires an expensive cut of beef, puff pastry, and a whole bunch of intricate steps. What could possibly go wrong? So, the night of the big dinner arrives, and I've been planning all day. I got the ingredients, watched a couple of YouTube tutorials because, let's be real, no one actually makes beef Wellington without watching a tutorial, and I was feeling pretty confident about the whole thing. I sent Sarah a text, telling her to be at my place at 7 p.m., and I started setting in my kitchen. The first thing I did was season the beef and sear it. Everything was going great so far. I could practically smell the wow on Sarah's face already. But then, the next step was to wrap the beef in the mushroom duxelle, a mixture of finely chopped mushrooms, onions, and herbs sautéed in butter. I had never made duxelle before, but how hard could it be, right? I followed the recipe, but I didn't realize I had left the heat a bit too high, and within minutes, the mushrooms were starting to burn. I scrambled to salvage the mixture, tossing in a little bit of extra butter and hoping I could still make it work. At this point, I'm already sweating. But hey, no big deal. I quickly wrapped the now slightly charred mushroom mixture around the beef, wrapped it in prosciutto, and then moved on to the puff pastry. This part was supposed to be the easy part, just roll out the pastry and wrap it around the beef. But I had underestimated how hard it was to work with puff pastry when you don't have a proper rolling pin, and my attempt was more like a lumpy, misshapen blob than the neat, elegant roll that the recipe showed. But I was determined. I brushed the pastry with egg wash and stuck it in the oven. That's when things really took a turn. I set the oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit as per the recipe, and I decided to multitask while it cooked. Sarah was due to arrive in about 30 minutes, so I figured I could get the appetizers ready and set the table while the beef cooked. I pulled out some garlic bread and tossed it in the oven, thinking that while the beef was finishing, the garlic bread would be a nice side to serve. And then I got distracted. I'm not sure how long I was working on the appetizers or setting the table, but when I finally went back to check on the beef Wellington, I was hit with a wall of smoke. The oven was full of smoke. I opened it, and to my horror, the puff pastry had exploded. It was charred on one side and oozing all over the oven, creating a mess that was beyond repair. The garlic bread? Also completely burned. I freaked out. I quickly turned off the oven, opened the windows, and started frantically waving a towel around, trying to dissipate the smoke. But at that moment, the worst possible thing happened. I knocked over a bottle of olive oil that I had sitting on the counter, and it rolled across the floor, splashing onto the burner. I had no idea the burner was still on from earlier. In an instant, the oil ignited, and suddenly I had a full-blown fire on my hands. I panicked. I grabbed the first thing I could think of, an oven mitt, and tried to slap the fire out, but that only made it worse. The flames were rising, and I could hear the unmistakable sound of the smoke detector going off. I grabbed the fire extinguisher and tried to use it, but in my panic, I couldn't remember how to use it properly. It was chaos. At that moment, I heard a knock on the door. Sarah had arrived. I was standing there in my kitchen, fire extinguisher in hand, smoke pouring out of every corner, with a burned beef Wellington and ruined garlic bread. And the worst part? I was trying to act calm, like this was totally normal. I opened the door, expecting Sarah to smell the disaster and make a quick exit, but instead, she stood there, wide-eyed, with a concerned look on her face. Is everything okay? She asked. I immediately tried to make some excuse. Yeah. Everything's fine. Just a little mishap in the kitchen. Cooking stuff. Nothing serious. She raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. At this point, I knew the date was already a bust. I led her into the kitchen, and she stood there for a second, looking at the disaster. The burnt food, the blackened oven, the half-empty fire extinguisher. Then she just burst out laughing. I tried to laugh along with her, but it was painful. I had worked so hard to impress her, and instead, I had created a scene out of a bad sitcom. We ended up ordering pizza. It wasn't exactly the romantic, home-cooked meal I had envisioned, but at least we could laugh about it. After we ate, Sarah was really sweet about everything, telling me that she thought it was cute I had tried to cook. But inside, I was dying. I had gone from master chef to total disaster in a matter of hours. Looking back, I realize I should have just stuck to something simple. Like spaghetti or tacos, things I knew I could make without causing a fire hazard. But hey, lesson learned. I haven't tried cooking for her again. Honestly, I'm too embarrassed. Maybe one day I'll get the courage to try again, but for now, I think I'll stick to ordering in. But yeah, that's how I almost burned down my kitchen on our second date. Still trying to recover my dignity. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. TIFU by accidentally locking myself in a storage room at work with no phone and no way to contact anyone for hours. This all started a few days ago when I was asked to help with a project at work. I work in a large office building, and our department often has to use an old storage room in the basement to retrieve supplies, old files, and miscellaneous office equipment. It's not the most glamorous task, but it's part of my job, and I'm used to it by now. The room itself is pretty dingy, stacked with old filing cabinets, broken printers, and boxes of things that probably haven't been touched in years. The door is heavy, creaky, and usually left unlocked, but it has a rather sturdy bolt lock on the inside. Just in case anyone feels like locking themselves in for some reason. On this particular day, my boss had asked me to retrieve some old project files for him. He had a vague memory of some paperwork being stashed away in the storage room, and as the only one available to go down there, I was the lucky one. I grabbed the keys to the storage room, which were hanging on a little hook in the break room, and headed downstairs. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, the room loomed ahead, dark and dusty as always. I unlocked the door, took a deep breath, because something about this place just felt creepy, and stepped inside. The air was thick, and I could smell the musty scent of old paper. As I rifled through the boxes, it occurred to me how little I actually knew about the room. I've been there hundreds of times, but I had never bothered to ask who even used it, or when it was last cleaned. I shrugged it off and got to work pulling down dusty files from the top of a shelf. Now, I'm a bit of a neat freak, and even though I knew no one was going to care about the mess, I made a point of stacking everything neatly as I went. I spent a good chunk of time in there, moving heavy boxes and files around, organizing things the way I thought they should be. After about 30 minutes, I had found the files my boss requested. I sighed with relief, closed the last box, and figured it was time to leave. But as I reached for the door, I realized something. The bolt lock on the inside of the room had somehow slid into place. At first, I thought it was just a fluke. Maybe the door didn't close properly when I came in? I didn't remember locking it, but who knows? Maybe I had accidentally pushed the lock when I entered. I gave the handle a firm twist, expecting it to open, but nothing happened. I pulled harder, then harder still, but the door didn't budge. I froze for a moment, staring at the door in disbelief. I tried the handle again, but it was completely stuck. Panic started to creep in, but I shook it off. There had to be a way out. The walls were thin, the room wasn't huge, so maybe I could just push through. I checked the other side of the door for a window, or anything to help me escape. Of course, it was just a solid, featureless wall. I began to laugh nervously at first. I'm not locked in here. I'm just overreacting, I told myself. So I tried again, yanking on the door and giving the lock another futile twist. Nothing. I looked around for something, anything, that could help me get out. My phone was still upstairs in my desk. I never bring it into the storage room since I usually just go in, grab what I need, and leave. I started to sweat. For the next few minutes, I tried every trick in the book. I pushed, pulled, and even tried to squeeze through the tiny gap around the door to no avail. I tried yelling for help, but the building is mostly empty in the afternoons, and I was deep in the basement. My voice didn't reach anyone, and the low hum of the fluorescent lights was the only thing to keep me company. After a while, I realized just how isolated I was. This was an old office building, one of those places where the floors creak and the lights flicker at odd times. The basement felt like a forgotten tomb, a place where time seemed to stop. It must have been around an hour before I gave up on trying to open the door by force. I sat down on the dusty floor and tried to think. I knew I couldn't just stay there forever. The building wasn't closing yet, but I also knew no one would be looking for me. No one even knew I was down there. I had no phone, no way to send an email, and no idea what time it was. I started to feel like I was going to be stuck in that room forever. I closed my eyes for a minute, telling myself it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Maybe I could just wait it out, right? Eventually, someone would come by, right? I glanced over at the little window in the storage room, the kind that lets in a sliver of light from the parking lot above ground. It was barely enough to see by, but it reminded me that the world outside was still moving, while I was just sitting there, trapped like an idiot. Hours passed. I didn't keep track of time, but I could feel the evening creeping in. The light from the window began to fade, and the air in the room grew warmer and thicker. I hadn't eaten anything all day, and my stomach started to growl louder. I kept trying to think of ways to get out, but all I could do was pound on the door and hope someone would hear me. At some point, I stopped trying to be productive or clever. I just sat there, hopeless. What kind of idiot locks themselves in a storage room like this? The worst part wasn't the hunger or the discomfort. It was the creeping realization that I was completely alone, in the dark, with no one to help me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard footsteps coming down the hall. My heart raced as I jumped to my feet and banged on the door as loud as I could. Help!
Someone!
I'm locked in here, I screamed. To my relief, I heard the footsteps stop. Then a voice. Who's there? I shouted again, feeling the weight of my desperation in every syllable. I'm locked in the storage room. I need help. A few moments later, I heard the sound of someone walking back up the hallway. I couldn't believe it. Had they just walked away? Then, a few seconds later, the footsteps returned, and I heard the door open. Are you okay? A coworker asked, peering into the room. Of course I'm not okay. I've been locked in here for hours. I practically shouted in relief. They quickly unlocked the bolt and swung the door open, letting in a rush of cool air and light from the hallway. I stumbled out, disoriented and exhausted. The coworker gave me a puzzled look, but I didn't care. I had just survived my own little nightmare. I made my way back upstairs, still in a daze, to finally grab my phone and send a quick text to my boss about the files. As I stood there, catching my breath, I realized one thing. Next time, I'm never going to be caught without my phone again. And maybe, just maybe, I'll make sure that door never locks again.
So, yeah.
TIFU by locking myself in a storage room for hours and basically having a minor existential crisis while no one knew where I was. Moral of the story? Always check your surroundings before getting locked in. And, for the love of all things good, never forget your phone. TLDR, locked myself in a storage room at work with no phone, spent hours trapped until a coworker finally rescued me. So, I've always been that guy who's careful about things, especially when it comes to health and safety. I've been a germaphobe for as long as I can remember. I wash my hands excessively, I make sure my food is always fresh and sanitized, and I have a pretty intense cleaning routine that would put most germaphobes to shame. I'm the guy who wipes down every surface when I sit down at a restaurant, and I refuse to touch door handles with my bare hands. To put it simply, I've always been the type of person to go above and beyond to avoid germs or anything that could potentially make me sick. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I started to feel like something was off. I'm not sure exactly when it started, but I noticed I had been feeling a bit sluggish. It wasn't anything major, just a general sense of exhaustion that didn't go away after a good night's sleep. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was probably just working too hard or that I was fighting off some mild cold or something. But as the days went by, the feeling didn't subside, and I started to notice some other symptoms creeping in. One morning, I woke up and felt like I had a bit of a scratchy throat. That's when I started to think, okay, this might actually be a cold. But I didn't want to risk getting worse, so I decided to do what I thought was the responsible thing. I went to the pharmacy to get some over-the-counter meds to nip it in the bud. I figured some throat lozenges and a little bit of cough syrup would do the trick. I'll admit, I've always been a little hesitant about going to the doctor for small things like this. I didn't want to waste anyone's time or make a big deal out of what might just be a minor illness. So I figured I'd take care of it myself as usual. The symptoms continued for a couple of days, but they weren't anything that caused me to miss work or make me feel like I needed medical attention. But then one evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I looked in the mirror and saw something that really freaked me out. I noticed a small red bump on my neck, just below my ear. At first, I thought it was maybe a pimple or something, but when I touched it, it felt much harder than a pimple, almost like a swollen lymph node. I started to panic. I Googled swollen lymph node under ear, and of course, the internet told me all sorts of worst-case scenarios. Cancer, infections, lymphoma, basically everything that could possibly go wrong. I was immediately convinced that I had something horrible. In my usual fashion, I decided that I couldn't wait any longer, and I made an appointment with my doctor the very next day. This was a Friday, so the doctor's office was packed with people. I waited in the waiting room, nervously Googling more and more health articles, getting myself worked up even more. By the time my name was called, I was practically sweating. The doctor was calm, cool, and collected as she examined my neck. She confirmed that it was indeed a swollen lymph node, but she reassured me that it was more likely to be a result of a minor infection or viral illness, something most people go through all the time. She mentioned that the node could be swollen because my body was fighting off something, like a mild virus or even a cold that I wasn't fully aware of yet. Still, my mind raced. I kept thinking about the worst possible scenario, despite the fact that she seemed so confident that it wasn't anything serious. But I listened to her advice and followed her recommendation to keep an eye on the bump and return if it didn't go away in a week or so. She also prescribed me antibiotics, just in case there was a low-grade infection I hadn't noticed. As the weekend came and went, I began to obsess over the swelling. It wasn't going down and I just couldn't relax. I kept touching it, hoping it would shrink, but instead, it stayed the same size. The antibiotics didn't seem to make a difference either, and I started to get paranoid that they weren't working. By Monday morning, I was officially a wreck. I was convinced that I was dying of some rare disease, and I made an appointment to see a specialist. This time, I went to an ENT, ear, nose, and throat doctor. I sat through another nerve-wracking wait at the office, practically shaking with fear. When the specialist finally saw me, he took a quick look at the swollen lymph node and said something that instantly made me want to crawl into a hole and never come out. Well, you seem to have a pretty classic case of what we call a sinus infection, or a viral upper respiratory infection. You might not even realize you have it, but it can cause swollen lymph nodes. Now, if you've ever been in a situation where you're expecting the worst news possible, only to hear something completely mundane, it's a bit of a mind trip. Here I was fully convinced I had some rare form of cancer or an incurable illness, and the doctor was casually telling me I had a sinus infection. He explained that the sinus infection was likely very mild and that my body was just responding to it in a way that caused the lymph node to swell. The symptoms I had were actually pretty typical for viral infection, and the swelling would go down on its own. He told me to relax, take some decongestants, and hydrate. I left the office feeling both incredibly relieved and extremely embarrassed. How did I let myself get so worked up over something so small? I had spent days stressing myself out, Googling every possible disease I could find and making appointments with multiple doctors, all because of a mild sinus infection that I could have easily treated at home. The moral of the story? Don't be like me. Don't let anxiety get the best of you. And for God's sake, don't assume the worst before you've even seen a doctor. I feel like a total idiot now, but at least I learned a valuable lesson about keeping my cool and not jumping to conclusions. I'm just glad it wasn't anything more serious than a simple sinus infection. So yeah, that's my TIFU. I'm officially the guy who nearly ruined his week over a swollen lymph node. I'm pretty sure I'll be a little more relaxed the next time I feel a small bump on my body, unless, of course, it's on my neck again. Then I might just panic a little bit. I'll start by saying that I'm not a complete idiot. But, boy, did I feel like one yesterday. It all started with a simple trip to the store, which I thought would be quick and easy. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. It was a Saturday afternoon, and my girlfriend and I had decided to cook a nice dinner together. We hadn't done it in a while because we'd been swamped with work and life in general. So, we agreed to make it special. She had already picked out a recipe online, and we just needed to pick up a few ingredients. I've never been a huge fan of grocery shopping. Honestly, I'd rather just pay someone to do it for me. But it's not like we had a personal shopper, so I agreed to go to the store while she stayed home to prep the kitchen. The list was simple enough: some fresh vegetables, chicken, a couple of spices, and a fancy bottle of wine to go with the meal. I grabbed my keys, made sure my phone was charged, and set off for the store. As soon as I walked in, I remembered how much I hated grocery stores. The bright lights, the endless aisles, and the feeling of being bombarded with choices. But I powered through, telling myself this was for a good cause. It wasn't that I didn't want to do something nice for my girlfriend. It's just that grocery shopping isn't exactly my idea of fun. I got the veggies. No problem. The chicken was on sale, and I grabbed a couple of packs, thinking I'd be ahead of the game. But then came the spices. The recipe called for a specific blend of spices I had never heard of before, sumac. Now, I know what you're thinking. Oh, he's about to mess this up. And you'd be right. I wandered the aisles looking for sumac, but after what felt like an eternity, I couldn't find it. I checked the spice aisle twice, then moved to the international food section, assuming it might be hidden among some Middle Eastern ingredients. Nothing. I started to feel that familiar panic setting in, the kind you get when you know you should be home soon, but you can't seem to find the one thing you need. It was starting to get embarrassing. People were walking past me, giving me strange looks, probably wondering why some grown man couldn't find a spice. After 10 more minutes of searching, I started to give up hope. I'd already wasted so much time looking for this spice, and I didn't want to disappoint my girlfriend by coming back empty-handed. So, I made a rash decision. I thought to myself, how different could sumac really be from other spices? I decided to substitute it with something I knew I could find: paprika. Not just any paprika, though. I was feeling bold, so I grabbed the smoked variety. Surely that would add some flair, right? Feeling proud of my resourcefulness, I moved on to the next part of the shopping list: the wine. This is where things started to spiral. I'm not a wine connoisseur, but I know enough to pick out a decent bottle. My girlfriend had mentioned wanting something red, so I went straight to the reds. But there were so many options, and I really had no idea what I was doing. I picked a bottle that had a fancy label and a price tag that made my wallet wince. This should be good, I thought, imagining the look on my girlfriend's face when I brought home a bottle that looked expensive. I made my way to the checkout, feeling a little too pleased with myself for pulling off this gourmet shopping trip. As I walked out of the store, I realized I had forgotten to buy the garlic. I cursed under my breath and briefly considered going back in, but then I figured I could make do without it. After all, I had the chicken, the vegetables, the spices, well, smoked paprika, and the fancy wine. Surely that would be enough, right? When I got home, my girlfriend was excited to see me back so soon. She had already set up the kitchen, and everything was ready to go. I placed the bags on the counter, and she started unpacking them. I could tell by the look on her face that she was confused by the paprika I had chosen. But I explained how I couldn't find sumac and that the smoked paprika would add a unique twist to the recipe. She didn't seem convinced but smiled and said, "Well, I trust you. Let's get cooking." We began prepping the food, and everything seemed fine at first. The chicken was seasoned with the paprika, of course, and the veggies were chopped. As I started cooking, I noticed that the aroma in the kitchen was not what I had expected. It didn't smell like the dish we had planned. It smelled smoky, like a campfire. My girlfriend raised an eyebrow and said, "Are you sure about that paprika? It smells a bit intense." I reassured her, telling her it would be fine. But as the meal progressed, I could tell she was getting more and more skeptical. The chicken was cooking, but it didn't look quite right. The veggies were starting to look a little wilted, and everything was beginning to take on a strange, reddish hue. The wine, which I had thought was so classy, was sitting unopened on the counter. I hadn't even thought to pair it with the dish because I was too focused on not ruining the food. When it was finally ready, we sat down to eat. I took my first bite, and my stomach immediately dropped. The food tasted strange. The paprika, which I had thought would add a subtle, smoky flavor, was overwhelming. It tasted like I had just taken a bite out of a barbecue grill. I glanced at my girlfriend, and I could see her trying to hide the look of disappointment on her face. She took a small bite and put her fork down slowly. "This isn't what I expected," she said, trying to be polite. I sat there, mortified, realizing that I had completely messed up dinner. I had ruined the one thing that was supposed to be special. The food was inedible, the wine wasn't a match, and the whole evening was going off the rails. After a long, awkward silence, I finally admitted it. I didn't get the sumac. I couldn't find it, so I used smoked paprika instead. She blinked a few times, processing what I had just said, and then we both burst out laughing. It was honestly the only way to cope with the disaster I had created. The food was a mess, and there was no fixing it. We ended up ordering pizza and drinking the wine, which, to be fair, was decent once we weren't trying to pair it with barbecue-flavored chicken. I learned two things that night. First, never substitute spices unless you really know what you're doing. And second, I should never try to impress anyone with my cooking skills again. I'm leaving that to the professionals. Anyway, that's how I ruined dinner. I'll be sticking to takeout for the foreseeable future. This is the story of how my big mouth and my stubbornness led to an absolute disaster during a family vacation. It all started last summer when my parents decided to take the entire extended family on a week-long trip to a beautiful beach resort. There was a lot of hype about it. My parents, my two siblings, their partners, my cousins, aunts, uncles, and even my grandmother were all going. Everyone was super excited.
Me?
Not so much. I'm the kind of person who doesn't really enjoy group vacations. The idea of being in a small condo with a bunch of people I'm related to for an entire week sounded like my worst nightmare, but I couldn't very well skip out on it. To make matters worse, I was already annoyed with my cousin, Brad. Brad's that guy who can't stop talking about his amazing job in finance and how much money he makes. His entire personality revolves around his career and the number of zeros on his paycheck. So, when I found out that we were staying in a place where he and I would be sharing a room, my heart sank. The first day at the resort, everything was actually going okay. The beach was gorgeous, the food was decent, and the sun was out. But Brad's personality had already started to irk me. We went on a tour of the resort that evening, and Brad just kept talking about how many luxury condos he could afford around the area and how the prices were ridiculous. I tried to brush it off, but the guy just wouldn't stop. Finally, I had enough and made a sarcastic comment about how he should probably buy the entire beach resort while he was at it, considering how much money he had. He just chuckled, but I knew it had landed because he suddenly stopped talking about real estate and began talking about something else. The next day, the drama began. It was my turn to plan an activity for the day, so I decided to do something everyone could enjoy, a boat trip around the coastline with some snorkeling. I figured this would be a great way to get away from all the awkward family dynamics and spend some time relaxing in the sun. Everyone agreed enthusiastically, except Brad, of course. He thought the boat ride was too touristy and not his style. He suggested we rent private jet skis instead, but that didn't go over well with my family. After a bit of a back and forth, I caved. I was tired of fighting, so I stuck with the original plan and ignored Brad's whining. The day came, and we boarded the boat with a few other vacationing families. We set off to explore the coast, and everything was going smoothly, until the part where I accidentally told Brad off in front of everyone. It happened when he started bragging about his company's latest earnings report and how he had closed a major deal worth millions. He was getting louder and louder, and I could feel myself getting irritated. In my head, I was calculating how many times he had already mentioned his job in the past 24 hours. And then, without thinking, I snapped. "Brad," I said, raising my voice so everyone could hear, "nobody here cares about how much money you make or how impressive your job is. We're all just trying to have a nice time, and you're ruining it. Could you please just enjoy the boat ride for once instead of making everything about you?" The boat went dead silent. My grandmother gasped, and my parents shot me looks like I had just killed a puppy. Brad, on the other hand, looked absolutely stunned. He stared at me for a few seconds, processing what I had just said, and then, with the most condescending smirk, he said, "Wow, okay. If that's how you're going to be, maybe I should just leave." Now, this is where I made my second big mistake. Instead of apologizing and trying to smooth things over, I leaned into the tension and said, "Fine, maybe you should. No one here is forcing you to stay." At that point, I was just digging my own grave. Brad didn't actually leave, but he sulked for the rest of the trip. He refused to participate in anything with the family. He barely even spoke to me, except for the occasional snide remark. The boat ride was awkward, and my parents spent the whole time trying to get me to apologize. I was stubborn, though. I had no intention of backing down. Later that night, Brad dropped a bombshell at dinner. He revealed that he had arranged for a private dinner with the resort's head chef and had invited a few of his colleagues who just happened to be at the resort for a conference. He didn't invite any of us, of course, just his important friends. My family was, understandably, not happy about this. There was a lot of tension in the air, and the evening was basically ruined. To make matters worse, my cousin started gossiping about how rude I had been to Brad, and I could feel the judgment coming from all sides. I wanted to crawl under the table. The next day, things got even worse. Brad decided to show off by renting a luxury yacht for the day. It was just him, his colleagues, and a few people from the resort staff. Of course, I wasn't invited, but my parents, in an effort to keep the peace, invited me to join them for a day at the spa instead. I reluctantly agreed, figuring a relaxing day of massages and facials would at least take my mind off the whole situation. While I was at the spa, things went from bad to worse for Brad. Apparently, the yacht trip had been a complete disaster. The weather turned unexpectedly, and the boat was caught in a sudden storm. To make things even more embarrassing, Brad's colleagues had to be rescued by the Coast Guard after the yacht nearly capsized. The whole thing made the local news, and Brad became the laughingstock of his professional circle. When I found out about it, I felt a mixture of relief and guilt. Part of me was satisfied that Brad had gotten his comeuppance, but another part of me knew that I had helped to escalate the situation. If I hadn't snapped at him so early in the trip, maybe he would have been more inclined to include us in the fun, or at least not try to prove how better he was than everyone else. The rest of the vacation was pretty awkward. Brad didn't talk to me, my parents were still upset with me for ruining the trip, and the family dynamic had definitely shifted. To be honest, I spent the last few days just trying to avoid everyone. I couldn't stop thinking about how I had completely mismanaged the whole situation. Instead of keeping my cool and letting Brad's constant bragging slide, I let my frustration build up and completely lost my temper. We left the resort a few days later, and the tension lingered. Brad barely acknowledged my existence, and I didn't make any attempts to fix things. I knew that eventually we would all move on, but I still felt like a jerk for letting things spiral so out of control. Looking back, I learned a valuable lesson about picking my battles and knowing when to just let things go. There are better ways to handle frustrating people than by opening my big mouth in the heat of the moment. I also realized that sometimes people's obnoxiousness is a reflection of their own insecurities, and I shouldn't let it get under my skin so easily. But, in the end, I learned this lesson the hard way, and I'll be sure to keep my temper in check next time I'm stuck on a family vacation with someone I can't stand. TIFU by not checking my email before going to an important job interview. A little backstory. I'm a 26-year-old guy who recently graduated with a degree in business administration. I've been hustling for months, trying to land my first full-time job. I had a couple of interviews, but nothing seemed to stick. One Monday morning, I get an email that seems like it could be my big break. A company I had applied to months ago finally reached out for an interview. They're a well-established tech firm, and I'd be lying if I didn't feel a little excited. This was a big deal. I read the email briefly and noticed that they wanted me to come in on Thursday at 10 a.m. The email also mentioned bringing a few documents, like my resume, references, and a copy of my ID. I glanced through it quickly and, like any reasonable person, assumed that this would be a standard interview. So I did what any anxious job seeker would do. I scheduled everything around it. I took the day off work, bought a new shirt, and made sure to get plenty of sleep the night before so I'd be well rested. But here's where I messed up. I never read the email carefully enough. If I had, I would have noticed the most important detail. The interview wasn't just for an entry-level position. It was for a management position. You know, the kind of job where they expect you to have some experience.
I didn't catch that part.
It was hidden under a few lines of text, and I was too excited to think logically about what I was applying for. The morning of the interview, I woke up feeling pretty confident. I got dressed in my nicest shirt and pants combo, threw on some deodorant, and grabbed my portfolio. I double-checked the address in the email. Yup, I knew where I was going. I packed my resume and references as they asked, and was out the door with plenty of time to spare. I even grabbed a coffee on my way to the office because, well, I was still half asleep and needed that caffeine boost. I got to the building 20 minutes early and was greeted by the receptionist. She asked me to sign in, which I did. Then she told me to have a seat, so I took a seat in the lobby and waited. The lobby was very sleek, with glass walls and fancy decor. There were a few other people waiting, so I assumed they were also here for interviews. I couldn't help but overhear snippets of their conversations. One guy was talking about how he had worked as a team lead at a different company for 5 years, while another woman was discussing a project she had led from start to finish at her last job. I started getting nervous. Were these people more qualified than me? My nerves were getting the best of me when a woman came out to greet me. She introduced herself as Michelle, the head of HR. She smiled warmly, but I could tell she had a professional air about her. She led me into a conference room, and we started talking. Now, up until this point, everything was fine. It was a standard interview. She asked me about my background, what I had done in previous jobs, and why I was interested in the position. I told her about my internships, my experiences working as a part-time sales associate during college, and how I had been working on several personal projects to sharpen my business skills. I was giving it my all, trying to sound confident and like I was the perfect fit for the job. But something felt off. As we went through the interview, Michelle started asking questions that didn't align with the entry-level role I thought I was interviewing for. So, in your previous role as a department manager, how did you handle team conflicts? She asked. I froze. I didn't know how to answer that. I had never been a department manager. I had never had to handle any significant team conflicts. Hell, I barely knew how to handle conflict in a group project for school, let alone a workplace scenario with multiple personalities at play. My mind started to race. Was she testing me? Was she trying to see if I could think on my feet? Well, I haven't really had to handle conflicts like that, but I can tell you I've worked in teams where communication was key, I said, trying to sound confident. It wasn't the best answer, but it was all I could muster. She nodded, as if she was waiting for me to continue. So, you've never had to deal with a situation where you had to step in as a leader to resolve a conflict? She asked again. No, I admitted, feeling my face grow warm. I mean, I've had some experience leading small groups in college, but nothing quite like managing a team in a professional setting. She didn't seem fazed, but I could tell I wasn't impressing her. We continued the interview, and the questions got more difficult. She asked me about budgeting, forecasting, and how I would approach high-level decision-making in the company. I started to feel like I was drowning. I hadn't prepared for this level of responsibility. I thought I was applying for a basic admin role or something that was more beginner-friendly, but it was clear now that this was way above my pay grade. The more questions she asked, the more I realized I was out of my depth. I tried to fake it, trying to sound smart and strategic, but it was becoming painfully obvious that I wasn't cut out for this position. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the interview came to an end. Michelle smiled politely and thanked me for my time. I got up, shook her hand, and left the room feeling like I had just bombed a major exam. I walked back to the lobby, where I had to sit down for a few minutes to collect myself. I had just wasted a huge opportunity. I wasn't ready for a management role. I wasn't even close to being ready for a management role. As I was about to leave, I checked my phone one last time, just to be sure. I opened the email and, for the first time, really read the job description in detail. That's when I saw it. We're looking for candidates with at least 3 to 5 years of management experience. I hadn't seen that before. It was there, right in front of me, but I had missed it because I was too eager to get the interview. I had applied for a job I wasn't qualified for, and now I had just embarrassed myself in front of a company I really admired. I left the building feeling deflated. Not only had I failed the interview, but I had done so because I hadn't bothered to read the email carefully. It was a stupid mistake, but a mistake I would never make again. Lesson learned: check every detail before showing up to an interview, especially when your dream job is on the line. Moral of the story? Don't get too excited and let your enthusiasm cloud your judgment. Always read the fine print. Always. TIFU by accidentally ruining my friend's wedding with a botched speech. So, a little context before I start. I've been best friends with Sam since high school. We've been through a lot together. He's been my wingman at parties, my shoulder to cry on through breakups, and honestly, we've always had this brotherly bond. A few months ago, Sam got engaged to his longtime girlfriend, Ella. It was no surprise, really. They're both great people and had been together for almost 5 years. I was beyond stoked for him. We all knew the wedding was going to be amazing, and of course, I was going to be a groomsman. A few days before the big day, Sam came to me with a request. He wanted me to give a speech at the reception. He said it would mean a lot to him because I was his best friend, and he knew I'd be able to say something heartfelt. Now, I've been to my fair share of weddings, but I've never given a speech before. I wasn't particularly nervous. Sam's my buddy, and I figured I could wing it. I mean, how hard could it be, right? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this speech would be a big deal. A wedding speech isn't just a few words. It's a moment. It's a chance to tell a story, reflect on the couple's relationship, and make everyone in the room laugh and feel warm inside. So, I decided to spend the day before the wedding working on it. I started writing, thinking of funny anecdotes, heartfelt memories, and inside jokes that would make Sam and Ella feel special. I probably overthought it, to be honest. I spent the entire afternoon in my apartment, going through old photos of Sam and me, drafting and redrafting what I wanted to say. I wanted to make sure my speech was perfect. I didn't want to be just another guy who got up there and mumbled a few half-hearted sentences. No, I was going to be the groomsman, funny, emotional, and memorable. I showed the speech to a couple of my friends for feedback, and they all thought it was great. They laughed at the right moments and even teared up at others. I felt confident. Maybe too confident. I felt like I had it in the bag. The wedding day arrived, and everything seemed perfect. The venue was stunning. This beautiful, rustic barn with fairy lights and floral arrangements everywhere. I helped Sam get dressed, made sure he wasn't too nervous, and just tried to keep things chill. The ceremony was beautiful. Ella looked gorgeous, and Sam had this look on his face like he was the luckiest guy in the world. I couldn't help but tear up a little myself. After the ceremony, we all moved to the reception hall for the party. Everyone was having a great time, eating, dancing, laughing. And then it was time for the speeches. Sam went first. He thanked everyone for coming, talked about his love for Ella, and made everyone laugh with a few funny stories about their relationship. Then came the part where he introduced me as the next speaker. I got up, trying to shake off any nerves. I had my speech memorized, and I'd been practicing it for days. As I stood there with the microphone, I took a deep breath, looked at Sam and Ella, and started my speech. At first, things were going great. I told the story of how Sam and I met in high school, how we'd gotten into trouble together, and how he was the kind of guy who would always have your back, no matter what. The audience was laughing. I felt good. Then I transitioned into a funny story about a trip we took a couple of years ago. It was one of those bro trips where you do stupid stuff for the sake of fun, and there was this one moment where Sam got a little too drunk and ended up in a fountain at 2 a.m. wearing nothing but his underwear. It was hilarious, and everyone was laughing. I thought I had them in the palm of my hand. But then I made the mistake of saying something that I thought would be funny, but in hindsight, was pretty terrible. I decided to get a little more personal. I was feeling brave, so I said, I always wondered when Sam would find someone who could put up with his bullshit. Then came Ella. She didn't just put up with him. She made him a better person. And I think we can all agree, Sam was a mess before he met her. Seriously, he was a disaster. The crowd chuckled at first, but then it became clear that the tone had shifted. I didn't realize it at the time, but what I had just said sounded a little too harsh. I could hear some nervous laughter, but the room got quieter. I should have stopped right there, but in my head I was like, oh, they're just being polite. Let's keep going. So I pushed forward. I wanted to end the speech on a high note, so I said, but Ella, you've whipped him into shape, and I've never seen him this happy. You're the best thing that's ever happened to him, and I know he'll spend the rest of his life trying to live up to you. The silence in the room felt off. A few people were shifting in their seats. I looked at Sam and Ella, waiting for them to smile or laugh. But instead, Sam was staring at me with a kind of strained expression. Ella, too, wasn't smiling. I immediately realized something was wrong, but I tried to push through. I finished the speech quickly, saying something like, here's to Sam and Ella. May your life together be filled with love, laughter, and very little drama. Cheers. I sat down feeling pretty good, but also sensing that something had gone wrong. I noticed that some of the other guests weren't as quick to join in the applause. A few awkward claps, a couple of polite smiles, but nothing genuine. Later in the evening, I found out just how badly I had messed up. Sam pulled me aside and asked me, what the hell was that, man? I tried to play it off as a joke, but he wasn't having it. He said, you totally just trashed me in front of everyone. It wasn't funny. And Ella felt humiliated. Turns out, Ella had been self-conscious about Sam's messy past for a while, and my joke about him being a disaster hit her harder than I could have ever imagined. Sam and I talked it out, and he told me that while he knew I didn't mean any harm, I had crossed a line. I felt like absolute trash. I never meant to hurt anyone, especially not Sam or Ella. The rest of the night was awkward. I tried to apologize, but it was clear that the damage had been done. I'm still friends with Sam, but the wedding speech fiasco is something I will never live down. To this day, when someone mentions weddings or speeches, Sam gives me this look like he's mentally preparing to tell me not to speak. And I don't blame him. Moral of the story, don't try to get too clever with wedding speeches. Stick to what you know, keep it light, and for the love of God, don't bring up anything that could be remotely embarrassing, even if you think it's funny. If you've got a friend who's about to get married, take my advice and keep your speech short, sweet, and drama-free. Otherwise, you might end up ruining the happiest day of their life, just like I did. TIFU, by trying to impress my crush with a home-cooked dinner, and it ended in complete disaster. It all started when I finally worked up the courage to ask out Sarah. Sarah was this amazing woman I had been admiring from afar for months. We worked together at a small office, and every time I saw her, I was struck by how beautiful, intelligent, and funny she was. I knew she was out of my league, but after a long time of trying to get her attention with small talk and friendly gestures, I decided to take the plunge and ask her on a date. When I asked her, I was shocked by how easily she said yes. She agreed to go out to dinner with me the following weekend. At first, I was thrilled, but then panic set in. What should I wear? Where should we go? Should I make her laugh? Should I be serious? The typical date anxiety was hitting me hard. But I had one brilliant idea. Instead of going to a restaurant, I'd cook for her at my place. I knew she liked homemade food because she had mentioned it in passing once. Plus, I thought it would show her that I wasn't just another guy who took her to some generic fancy restaurant. I could demonstrate that I had more depth by showing off my culinary skills. Or, at least what I thought were my skills. I spent the entire week planning the menu. I wasn't exactly a master chef, but I'd seen a lot of cooking shows and thought I could pull off something impressive. I settled on making chicken parmesan, mashed potatoes, and a side of roasted vegetables. Simple enough, right? I was wrong. The night of the dinner, I spent all day prepping. I wanted everything to be perfect. I put on some music to set the mood and even opened a bottle of wine to let it breathe while I worked. Things were going well until I got to the chicken. I had no idea that boneless, skinless chicken breasts could be so hard to cook evenly. I thought they'd cook quickly, but as I tried to fry them, I realized I was turning them into dry, rubbery discs. No amount of seasoning or olive oil seemed to help. I tried to salvage them by adding sauce on top, but I was starting to panic. Meanwhile, Sarah was about 15 minutes away from arriving. I still had the potatoes to mash, the vegetables to roast, and, to make matters worse, I had absolutely no idea how to set a nice table. I was trying to juggle all of these things at once, and it was quickly turning into chaos. I didn't even notice I had burned my hand on the hot pan until the pain set in. I yelped, and that's when I knocked over the wine bottle. Of course, it spilled everywhere, on the floor, on my favorite shirt, and just to add insult to injury, a small puddle splashed onto my phone, rendering it briefly useless. When Sarah texted me to let me know she was a few minutes away, I realized I had to pull myself together and make this work. But when I opened the oven to check on the vegetables, they were now charcoal. The chicken had somehow turned into a dry, sad-looking mess, and the mashed potatoes were, for some reason, still lumpy. At this point, I could feel my heart racing. I had no idea how I was going to salvage this. I quickly ran into the living room, grabbed some paper towels to wipe off the wine mess, and did my best to clean up the kitchen as quickly as possible. But there was no time to redo the food, so I just decided to go with what I had. I quickly set the table with mismatched plates, hoping she wouldn't notice. The candles flickered softly in the background, but in my mind, everything was about to fall apart. When Sarah finally arrived, I greeted her with a nervous smile and a glass of wine. I was trying so hard to act casual, but my palms were sweating. I led her to the dining table, where everything was set up, and she gave me a warm smile. "This looks so nice," she said, and I breathed a small sigh of relief. She seemed to appreciate the effort. We sat down, and I nervously served her the food. As soon as she took a bite of the chicken parmesan, I saw her face change slightly. It was subtle, but I could tell she wasn't loving it. She quickly took a sip of wine, probably to wash down the taste. Meanwhile, I was trying to convince myself that everything was fine. I kept smiling and engaging in small talk, but internally, I was falling apart. "You know," Sarah said, trying to be polite, "I can tell you put a lot of effort into this." I tried to hold it together. "Yeah, I really wanted to make this special," I said, hoping she didn't notice the slight bitterness in the sauce. I watched her cut into the chicken. It was as if I could hear her brain scream, "This is terrible," but she just chewed and swallowed. She took another bite, perhaps out of politeness, and I could feel my face burning with embarrassment. The next few minutes felt like a nightmare. I asked her about her day, but all I could think about was the chicken. I tried to make small talk about work, but my mind kept racing. Was she going to say something? Was she going to pretend it was good? Was this the moment everything would unravel? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she put down her fork and looked at me with a concerned expression. "Hey, are you okay?" she asked, clearly noticing my distress. I realized I was staring at my plate, practically shaking. I took a deep breath. "Honestly, no," I said. "This is a disaster. The chicken is terrible. The vegetables are burned. The potatoes are lumpy. I thought I could cook, but clearly, I have no idea what I'm doing." She smiled, trying to hold back a laugh. "It's okay," she said. "I actually think it's kind of adorable. You put yourself out there, and that's what matters." At that point, I wasn't sure if she was genuinely trying to make me feel better or if she was just being kind. But then, she reached over and grabbed my hand. "I'm not here for the food," she said. "I'm here because I like you. And you're doing your best, and that's all that matters." I was floored. Despite the disaster of a dinner, she seemed to be genuinely enjoying my company. It felt like a small win, but the guilt still hung over me. I couldn't stop thinking about how badly I'd messed up. The rest of the night wasn't perfect, but it wasn't a total failure either. We ended up sitting on the couch, talking for hours. The food remained untouched, but it didn't matter. By the end of the night, I realized something important. I didn't need to impress her with fancy meals or grand gestures. She appreciated me for who I was, flaws and all. Still, I'll never live down the time I tried to cook for her. My kitchen was a disaster zone, and I ended up having to order takeout, but it was one of the most memorable and humbling experiences of my life. The moral of the story? Don't try to cook something you've never made before when you're trying to impress someone. Also, sometimes the messiest moments end up being the best. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. So, let me start by saying that I thought I had my life all figured out. I'm 28, have a steady job, a decent apartment, and everything seems to be going well. But, as I've learned the hard way, sometimes the universe throws a wrench into your perfect plan, and you're left standing there wondering how the hell you ended up in a mess you never saw coming. And trust me, this mess was big. Like, big enough that it'll make you reconsider every decision you've ever made in your adult life. It all started innocently enough, just a Saturday afternoon, when I decided to meet up with my best friend, Chad. Chad and I have known each other since high school, and we've always been the type to hang out, catch up, and generally do nothing but waste time together. This Saturday, we decided to grab lunch at our favorite spot in the city. I showed up a little early and texted Chad to let him know I'd already gotten a table. He replied saying he'd be there in 10 minutes. Now, when I say my favorite spot, I mean it's a local hole-in-the-wall that serves the best Mexican food in town. I've been coming here for years, and the staff knows me by name. In fact, the owner, Carmen, is like family to me at this point. I never had any issues at this place. Good food, good vibes, and a casual atmosphere. But that was about to change. Chad finally shows up, and we get to talking. He's got some crazy work stories, I've got some dating drama to share, and before we know it, we've ordered our food and are waiting. Everything is fine, normal even, until it isn't. We're sitting there, just chatting, when this woman walks in. I noticed her immediately, because she was stunning. I mean, drop-dead gorgeous. She had that kind of beauty that made everyone around her stop what they were doing and pay attention. Long black hair, a perfect smile, and this vibe that screamed confidence. She walks up to the counter, orders her food, and then turns around to look for a seat. Now, I'm not usually the type to make a move on strangers, but in this case, I just couldn't help myself. I don't know what came over me, but I waved her over to our table. Big mistake. I gave her a little smile and said, "Hey, if you're looking for a seat, you're welcome to join us." She looked at me for a moment, probably trying to figure out if I was being serious or if I was just some creep. After a pause, she smiled back and said, "Sure, why not?" She walks over and sits down. Now, I have to admit, I was a little nervous, but I also thought, hey, this could be my chance to meet someone amazing. So we start talking. I introduce myself, and she introduces herself as Sophia. The conversation flows easily. She's smart, funny, and seems genuinely interested in what I have to say. Everything is going well, and I'm feeling like the luckiest guy in the world. We're talking about life, hobbies, and random stuff when the food finally arrives. Here's where things start to get weird. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was the spicy salsa, maybe the heat from the hot plate, or maybe it was just me being an idiot, but I suddenly felt a little lightheaded. At first, I tried to shake it off, but the feeling only got worse. I started sweating a little, then I felt my stomach doing flips. My vision started to blur, and before I knew it, I was getting tunnel vision. Everything started closing in on me, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I tried to play it cool, but the next thing I knew, I was sliding out of my chair. I managed to catch myself on the table, but at that moment, I realized I wasn't going to make it to the bathroom. I turned to Chad and said, "Dude, I don't feel good." Then I collapsed. The next thing I remember was waking up in a completely different spot. I wasn't in the restaurant anymore. I was lying on a couch, and my head was pounding like I'd just been hit by a truck. I looked around and saw Chad standing next to me, looking worried. "Bro, what the hell happened?" I mumbled, rubbing my eyes. Chad gave me a very confused look and said, "You just passed out, man." Like right there at the table. It was insane. Sophia freaked out and called 911. At this point, I was still trying to process what the hell had just happened. I tried to sit up, but my body felt heavy, like I'd just run a marathon. That's when I noticed the EMTs in the room, standing by the door, looking at me like I was a case study. So, I said, still feeling disoriented. "What's going on?" One of the paramedics looked at me and said, "You fainted, buddy. We ran a few tests. You're okay now, but you really should get checked out by your doctor." I turned to Chad, who was looking at me like I'd just committed a crime. "Dude, what the hell happened? I was fine 1 minute, and then Chad cut me off. "Man, I think you were drugged." I stared at him, confused. "What? No way."
How?
"Yeah, man, I'm serious. After you passed out, I noticed something weird. Sophia, she didn't seem freaked out enough. She called 911, sure, but she didn't seem that concerned. And then, I found this." He pulled out a small vial from his jacket pocket. It was clear and had some sort of residue inside. "Where did you get that?" I asked, suddenly feeling more and more alarmed. "I found it near your plate. Looks like someone slipped something into your food." At that point, I felt like I was going to lose it. Sophia, the beautiful woman I'd just met and had been talking to like everything was fine, had drugged me? I didn't know whether to be angry, scared, or just confused as hell. Chad and I sat there, talking to the paramedics for a while longer, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had been a setup. Why would she do this?
What did she want from me?
It didn't make sense. Later, after I was cleared by the paramedics, we left the restaurant. Carmen, the owner, was understandably upset about the incident and promised she would handle the situation. But at that point, all I could think about was Sophia. I never got her last name, didn't know anything about her other than what we talked about during our brief time together. I've spent the past few weeks trying to figure out what happened, but I haven't been able to get any answers. I reached out to the restaurant, and they said they'd reviewed the security footage, but they couldn't find anything suspicious about the situation.
So yeah,
that's my TIFU. I got drugged by a woman I thought I was hitting it off with in a restaurant I trusted over lunch with my best friend. Never again will I assume that anyone I meet in public is just being friendly. Moral of the story? Trust no one, not even in a place you think you know well. And always be careful about who you sit down with. You never know when you might end up being the target of some twisted plan. I've always had a bit of a love-hate relationship with my neighbor, Steve. Steve's a nice guy, or at least he used to be. He's one of those people who wants to be friends with everyone, but he's just a little off, you know? It's not that he's a bad person. It's just that every time we interact, something awkward happens. I've tried to be polite, smile and wave when we pass each other on the sidewalk, but lately, he's been doing things that have started to make me question my level of patience. A few weeks ago, Steve mentioned he was starting a small home renovation project. It didn't seem like a big deal at first. He's always been a bit of a DIY enthusiast, always talking about the latest tools he bought or the new YouTube channels he's discovered to teach himself something new. He said he was just going to remodel his kitchen and do some repairs around the house, but the truth is, he'd been getting a little bit too excited about it. He even started showing me his plans, which, at the time, I didn't think much of. I just nodded and pretended to understand, while secretly zoning out. Fast forward to last week. I'm sitting at home, enjoying a rare, quiet afternoon when I hear a knock on the door. It's Steve, of course. He's holding a big roll of blueprints in one hand and a measuring tape in the other, looking like he's about to start a whole new life of home improvement. He asks if I have a minute to look at his plans for the remodel. I tell him I don't have much time, but sure, I'll take a quick glance. This was my first mistake. Steve spreads out the blueprints on the floor, and I can immediately tell that he's got these huge, elaborate ideas that definitely seem out of his skill range. He's drawn a ridiculous open-concept kitchen with an island that looks like it belongs in a commercial restaurant, a second-floor addition for an office, and some random room in the back that he refers to as a multifunctional space. As I try to wrap my head around it, Steve starts talking about how he plans to do everything himself, and I try to listen and nod, but inside I'm screaming. I mean, he could barely put together a bookshelf last year without getting frustrated. So, naturally, I give him my honest opinion. Steve, this looks ambitious, I say. You're sure you want to do all this yourself? He confidently assures me that he's been watching a ton of YouTube tutorials and is now basically an expert in home renovation. I laugh nervously, unsure whether he's joking or if he genuinely believes this. I wish him luck, and as he leaves, I can't shake the feeling that this was going to go terribly wrong. Fast forward to 2 days ago. I'm getting ready to leave for work, and I hear loud banging noises coming from Steve's house. I glance out the window and see him, standing in his front yard, holding a sledgehammer. It's 7:45 a.m.
He's already at it.
This is when things start to spiral. By the time I get home from work that evening, the banging has turned into something far worse. Steve has taken down most of the wall that separates his kitchen from his living room. There's dust everywhere. The house looks like a war zone. I see Steve standing proudly amidst the chaos, grinning from ear to ear. "Hey," he calls out to me as I walk up my driveway. "What do you think?"
Pretty cool, right?
I stare at the destruction and then back at him, trying to keep my cool. "Steve, this is a bit much. Shouldn't you have hired a professional for something like this?" I ask, hoping he'll realize that maybe he's gone a bit too far. Steve just shakes his head. "No way. I've got it under control. I'm just knocking down a few walls here and there. You won't believe how much better this will look once it's done." I want to say more, but I don't know how to explain that he's clearly in over his head without sounding like a total jerk. So, I just give him a tight-lipped smile and go inside. That's when things get real. Later that night, around midnight, I'm woken up by the sound of something cracking. It's not just a little creak or a shift. It's loud, and it's coming from Steve's house. I jump out of bed and look out the window. I see Steve again, this time standing on a ladder, holding a crowbar and seemingly trying to remove a load-bearing beam from the ceiling. The house is shaking. It's like an earthquake. I can hear the beams creaking, the floorboards groaning, and I immediately feel like I'm in a nightmare. Panicking, I grab my phone and text him. "Steve, you have to stop. You're going to bring down the whole house." I get no response. I try calling him, but it goes straight to voicemail. At this point, I'm legitimately afraid his entire house is going to collapse. I can hear the drywall cracking. The whole thing is falling apart in front of my eyes, and Steve's just up there, whistling to himself like he's building the next architectural wonder. I've got no choice but to call 911. The operator answers, and I tell them there's a guy on my street demolishing his house at midnight. The operator sounds confused, but after I insist, she promises to send someone over. It takes about 20 minutes for the police and fire department to arrive. They knock on Steve's door, and when he opens it, they ask him what he's doing. He's confused at first but then laughs, telling them that he's just doing some renovations and that everything's fine. They take one look at the state of his house and quickly step back. There's a noticeable sag in the ceiling now. The walls are barely standing. Steve's renovations have turned his house into a dangerous, unstable mess. The firefighters tell him to leave immediately, and they start checking the structural integrity of the house. Meanwhile, I'm standing on my porch, trying to process what's happening. The next few hours are a blur. Steve's house is officially condemned for safety reasons, and the city has issued him a fine for not having any permits. He's given a temporary place to stay while they assess the damage. I don't think I'll ever be able to look at Steve the same way again. He's always been a bit too enthusiastic about things, but this was next level. I mean, who starts demolishing their house at midnight without even knowing the basics of home improvement? The worst part is, he keeps texting me every day to thank me for looking out for him and asking if I'm free to help him with some repairs next weekend. I think I've learned my lesson. Never get involved with your neighbor's DIY projects, no matter how friendly they seem. It's going to be a long time before he fixes his house or his reputation with me. To fool by accidentally sending a completely inappropriate message to my entire family group chat. It all started last week when I was at a family gathering and my cousin, who I'm pretty close with, showed me a meme. It was one of those hilarious, borderline NSFW memes that we both laughed at because we knew we were the only ones who would truly get it. My cousin and I have this unspoken bond where we share all sorts of weird, funny, and sometimes inappropriate memes that we know wouldn't fly in front of our conservative relatives. That evening, we were talking about how funny the meme was when she mentioned that she wanted to send it to the family group chat. Now, I knew that the family group chat was made up of people who were anything but open to that sort of humor. My aunt, who is the matriarch of the family, is especially strict about anything inappropriate. She's the type of person who always posts uplifting quotes and inspirational messages. She'd definitely be the one to comment, "Jesus wouldn't approve of this," if any of us dared to share anything questionable in the group chat. But we had a laugh about it, and I jokingly said, "Maybe I should send it. Let's see who'll be brave enough to appreciate it." Big mistake. I thought I was just texting my cousin and being all funny and sarcastic about it. I was laying in bed, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, when I tapped on the message thread with my cousin. I had a few messages from her to catch up on, but it was late, and my mind wasn't all there. In my half-dazed state, I found the meme again and thought, why not? Let's share the meme, see what happens. So, I hit the forward button. But there was one slight problem. I wasn't in the group chat with my cousin. I was, in fact, in the family group chat. And without realizing it, I sent the meme to my entire family. The thing is, the meme I sent wasn't just any meme. It was a very raunchy one that involved a crude joke about my aunt's cooking skills. We all know that Aunt Carol loves to think she's the best cook in the family, but let's just say her dishes have been the subject of countless jokes over the years. So the meme was this wild, exaggerated cartoon that showed a chef, supposedly based on Aunt Carol, burning everything she tried to make. The meme was one of those that showed her holding up a pot of burnt food with the caption, "When you think you're the queen of the kitchen, but the kitchen tells you otherwise." It was savage, but my cousin and I were laughing about it because we both found it hilarious. What I didn't realize was that my finger was just too fast, and before I could process what I was doing, the meme was out there in the open, shared to the entire family, including Aunt Carol herself. I didn't notice right away. I was scrolling through TikTok when my phone buzzed, and I looked down to see my aunt's name pop up in the notifications. "Aunt Carol is typing," it said. I figured she was probably going to make some lighthearted joke or maybe even call me out for my bad sense of humor. But then, the messages started coming in. "Excuse me?" "Aunt Carol," followed by 3 angry emojis and a long line of question marks. Who thought this was funny? My mom, with a frown emoji. "What's wrong with you?" Uncle Dan, who never gets involved in anything drama-related and typically avoids confrontation at all costs. I froze, immediately realizing what had happened. In my panic, I opened the family chat and saw the meme sitting there like a ticking time bomb. My heart sank as I watched the text messages flood in. "Aunt Carol, I'm so sorry," my cousin quickly typed, clearly aware of what had just transpired. I didn't mean for this to go to the whole chat. But it was too late. Aunt Carol had already unleashed her fury. "Whoever sent this, you've gone too far. This is disgusting, and I expect an apology. Now." Her message was followed by a string of other relatives chiming in, some confused, some disgusted, and some clearly just as mortified as I was. I tried to apologize immediately, but the more I typed, the worse things seemed to get. "I didn't mean to send that to the group. I'm sorry, it was a mistake." But the floodgates were open, and the damage was done. Uncle Steve, who usually keeps to himself, replied, "That meme is absolutely vile. How dare you think it's funny to make fun of Aunt Carol's cooking? If this is how you treat family, I don't want to be a part of it." At this point, I was in full-blown panic mode. My palms were sweating as I tried to figure out how to make this right. How could I undo what I had just done? How could I explain that I hadn't intended to offend anyone, let alone the one person who was probably the most sensitive about her cooking skills? But my phone was blowing up more by the second. "Get off your phone and apologize to Aunt Carol right now," my mom texted me privately. I tried to call my aunt, hoping that a voice-to-voice conversation might calm things down, but she didn't answer. I left a voicemail saying, "Aunt Carol, I am so sorry. I didn't mean to send that, and I never intended to hurt you. It was a joke that just got out of hand. Please forgive me." But nothing seemed to work. The tension in the group chat was unbearable. I could tell my aunt was deeply hurt, which made me feel even worse. This wasn't just some silly mistake. I had accidentally crossed a line with a joke that shouldn't have been shared in the first place. After all, family gatherings often revolve around Aunt Carol's cooking, and the thought that I had made her feel humiliated or disrespected was crushing. Then came the final blow. "That's it," Aunt Carol texted. "You're banned from the family potluck. Don't come to Thanksgiving." I was floored. The family potluck was one of the biggest events of the year. I had been looking forward to it for months. The idea of not being able to show up to Thanksgiving, which was always full of laughter, food, and family togetherness, felt like a personal defeat. I sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity, reflecting on what had just happened. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had been thoughtless. It wasn't just a meme anymore, it was a mistake that might take a long time to undo. Eventually, after hours of stewing over the mess I'd made, I finally got a message from Aunt Carol, a simple one. "I think you owe me an apology in person." I immediately called her, my voice shaky as I explained once again how deeply sorry I was. Luckily, after some back and forth, she eventually accepted my apology, and we made amends. But the lesson was clear. Humor, especially of the crude variety, should always be carefully considered before hitting send. I learned the hard way that a joke meant for a close friend could easily turn into a disaster when sent to a family chat. So, yeah, that's how I accidentally became the black sheep of the family for a while. I'm still banned from the potluck this year, but maybe by Christmas, I'll be allowed back into the fold. Fingers crossed. TIFU by accidentally exposing my deepest, darkest secret to my entire family at Thanksgiving dinner. I don't know if this is going to be funny or tragic, but it sure as hell is embarrassing. So, here's the deal. I'm the kind of person who values privacy. I don't like people snooping into my life, and I especially don't like sharing anything too personal with my family. I know that sounds weird because, well, family is supposed to be the ones you can trust, right? But for me, that's never really been the case. My family can be a bit overbearing at times, and I've always liked to keep certain parts of my life private. Fast forward to last Thanksgiving. I was hosting, as usual, because I'm the responsible one in the family. I handle all the logistics, getting the turkey, making sure everyone knows when to show up, and so on. My cousin Julie, who's the same age as me, has a reputation for being a bit of a troublemaker. She's the one who always stirs the pot and finds a way to turn any situation into chaos. I'm sure you can already guess where this is going. We're sitting around the table, everyone's eating and chatting. The conversation is light, mostly about what everyone's been up to lately, family gossip, that kind of thing. My aunt and uncle are talking about their latest trip to Europe, and Julie starts asking all sorts of nosy questions. We're all laughing and joking, and for a brief moment I think, hey, this isn't so bad. Maybe we can actually get through this dinner without anyone bringing up anything awkward. But then, Julie decided to ask me a question. A completely innocent question, or at least, that's how it seemed at the time. She turned to me and asked, "So, have you met anyone special lately? You've been keeping things pretty quiet." Now, I'm not exactly someone who talks openly about my romantic life. In fact, I've been keeping something from my family for a while now. Something big. Something I thought I could hide forever. I've been dating a woman for the past 2 years. Her name is Emma, and she's amazing. I met her while I was working on a project at work, and we just clicked. We've had an incredible relationship, and I'm so happy with her. The problem? My family is extremely conservative, and I knew they wouldn't exactly be thrilled about me dating someone who isn't a guy. It's not that they're homophobic, but they just don't understand it. So, I've kept the whole relationship under wraps, telling everyone that I'm not seeing anyone to avoid the inevitable questions and awkwardness. Anyway, back to Thanksgiving dinner. When Julie asked me that innocent question, I froze. I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want to reveal the truth either. So, like a complete idiot, I tried to dodge the question by saying something vague like, "Oh, just focusing on work right now, nothing serious." But Julie wasn't having it. She leaned in, all smirky, and said, "Come on, don't be coy. You've got to be seeing someone. Spill the beans." I was caught off guard, and before I could stop myself, I said, Actually, I've been seeing someone. Her name is Emma. Silence. I immediately regretted it. I mean, what the hell was I thinking? Why did I just blurt that out? But it was too late. My family was staring at me in complete shock. My mom, who's usually the most composed person at the table, had a look on her face like she'd just seen a ghost. My dad was frowning, and even my brother, who's usually oblivious to everything, was staring at me with wide eyes. Julie, of course, was loving every second of this. She's the kind of person who thrives on drama, and this was the jackpot. Whoa, hold up. You're dating a girl? She asked, her voice rising in pitch. When were you going to tell us? How long has this been going on? I could feel the heat rising in my face. I glanced at my mom, who was still staring at me, her mouth slightly open. Well, it's been a while, I muttered. 2 years, actually. The room was dead silent. No one knew what to say. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel my palms sweating. My mom finally found her voice and said, "You've been dating a woman for 2 years, and you never told us?" I tried to explain myself, but the words just weren't coming out right. I didn't want to make things weird, I said, which, in hindsight, was probably the worst thing I could have said. I knew you guys might not understand. My dad, who had been sitting there looking like he was trying to process this information, finally spoke up. What do you mean, understand? You should have told us. We love you no matter what. His voice was steady, but I could tell he was having a hard time wrapping his head around it. I think the shock was too much for him to handle all at once. And then came the inevitable question from my uncle. So, how long have you been into women? The way he phrased it was so awkward, I wanted to crawl under the table and hide. But I had no choice but to answer. I'm not sure how to answer that, I said, trying to keep things as calm as possible. It's just who I am. I've always been like this, but I never really knew how to tell you. There was a long pause, and for a second, I thought maybe the tension would break. Maybe everything would go back to normal. But then, my cousin Rachel, who's always been a bit more progressive and open-minded than the rest of the family, chimed in. Look, this is your life, and you don't owe anyone an explanation. You don't have to hide who you are. That was a relief. Finally, someone was on my side. But then, of course, Julie couldn't resist. Oh, I just think it's so cool they're coming out. I mean, it's about time, right? You've been acting all mysterious for so long. This is so dramatic, I love it. I was dying inside. This was not how I imagined my Thanksgiving going. What was supposed to be a nice, quiet dinner had turned into a full-on family therapy session. As the night went on, things started to calm down a little. My mom pulled me aside later and said she was proud of me for being honest, even though she was still processing everything. My dad, who had initially been shocked, was more supportive as well, though he admitted he needed time to adjust. The rest of the family had varying reactions. Some were confused, some were supportive, and some were just awkward. Looking back, I don't regret coming out to my family. It was a huge relief to finally be honest with them, and while it was uncomfortable, I know they'll come around eventually. The moral of the story is this. If you're going to drop a bombshell on your family, maybe don't do it when everyone's had a few too many glasses of wine at Thanksgiving dinner. At least it made for an unforgettable holiday. I'll never live this down. It all started one lazy Sunday afternoon, the kind where the sun is high, the birds are chirping, and the only thing on my mind is finishing up a few chores and maybe catching up on a show. My name is Jake, and I was living a pretty normal life, nothing out of the ordinary to report. I had recently moved into a small, quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of place where everyone knows each other's name, and the biggest drama is when someone forgets to put their trash cans away on time. It was peaceful, and I liked it that way. But this particular Sunday, things were about to take a turn for the absurd. You see, I had been putting off an important task for weeks, getting rid of the old couch in my living room. It was one of those couches that you get in college, cheap, ugly, and surprisingly uncomfortable. Over the years, it had become the centerpiece of my living room, and not in a good way. But since moving into my new place, I'd promised myself I'd finally get rid of it. The problem was, I didn't have a truck or a way to dispose of it. So, I did what any reasonable adult would do. I decided to ask my neighbor, Greg, if he could help me. Greg was the kind of guy who was always willing to lend a hand. He had a beat-up pickup truck, and I figured he could help me haul the couch to the local landfill or donation center. We weren't exactly close friends, but we'd exchanged pleasantries over the fence a few times and helped each other out with small tasks. I thought, hey, what's the worst that could happen? I went over to his house around noon, knocked on the door, and he answered in his usual laid-back manner. He was wearing a faded band tee, some cargo shorts, and flip-flops. Typical Greg. Hey, Jake. What's up? He said, giving me a grin. Hey, Greg.
Got a bit of a favor to ask.
Do you think you could help me get rid of my old couch? I don't have a way to transport it, I said, trying to keep it casual. Sure thing, man. Let me grab my keys and we'll head out, he said, already heading to his garage. Now, at this point, I was feeling pretty good about my decision. It was a simple task, and I'd be rid of the eyesore in my living room. Little did I know, this simple errand would spiral into one of the most embarrassing and stressful afternoons of my life. We grabbed the couch and loaded it into the back of Greg's truck. It was a tight fit, but we managed to secure it with a few bungee cords. All right, we're good to go, Greg said, giving the couch a quick once-over. Let's hit the road. We drove to the nearest landfill, which was about a 15-minute drive away. Everything was going according to plan, or so I thought. As we pulled into the entrance of the landfill, I noticed something strange. There was a massive line of cars waiting to drop off their junk. The place was packed. Looks like it's a popular day to get rid of stuff, I said. Yeah, it must be, Greg replied, clearly unfazed. We crawled along with the other cars, inching closer to the drop-off area. The air smelled faintly of trash, but I didn't mind too much. After all, it was a landfill. The mood was light, and we joked about how much easier it would be to just burn the couch in Greg's backyard and be done with it. But as we neared the unloading area, things started to go south. As Greg pulled up to the spot where the workers were directing vehicles, one of the attendants waved him down. Hey, you can't unload here. This is for large appliances and furniture only. You'll need to go around to the back. Wait, what? Greg asked, confused. I thought this was the drop-off area. Yeah, I know, the attendant said, but his face was serious. But you've got to go to the back lot. It's a special section for stuff like couches and mattresses. At this point, I was getting a little irritated. Are you kidding me? We've been in line for 15 minutes, and now we have to go around to the back? What a waste of time. But Greg, being the easygoing guy that he is, just shrugged it off. And no big deal, Jake. Let's just go around. No rush. So we drove around the back of the landfill, where, unsurprisingly, the line was even longer. At this point, it felt like we were in some weird version of a traffic jam at a dump. The whole thing was starting to feel more and more ridiculous. But I kept telling myself, it's just a couch. Once it's gone, everything will be fine. After what felt like an eternity, we finally reached the back unloading area. The attendant at this station was a different guy, and he looked even less pleased to see us. You here to drop off that couch? The guy asked, eyeing the truck with disdain. Yeah, Greg said. Where do you want us to put it? All right, park over there, the attendant said, pointing to a far corner of the lot. We've got a dumpster specifically for couches. As we drove to the designated area, I couldn't help but notice that there were several other people with furniture to unload. It seemed like everyone had the same idea today. By now, I was starting to get really frustrated. My entire Sunday was slipping away because of this stupid couch. When we finally parked and got out, we noticed something even worse. The dumpster designated for couches was overflowing. There were already piles of old furniture, mattresses, and random household junk stacked around it. It was an absolute mess. This is ridiculous, I muttered under my breath. This whole place is a disaster. Yeah, but hey, it's almost done, Greg said, trying to cheer me up. Let's just toss it in and be done. We got to the dumpster and began maneuvering the couch toward it. But then, as fate would have it, the couch got stuck. It wouldn't fit into the dumpster, no matter how hard we tried. We shoved and pulled, but it was like the universe was conspiring against us. Finally, Greg threw up his hands in frustration. All right, screw this, he said. We're leaving. This is way too much trouble. We both climbed back into the truck and began to drive out of the landfill. As we pulled up to the exit gate, the attendant there gave us a look like we had just committed some sort of crime. "Hey, where's the couch?" he asked. "We tried to drop it off, but the dumpster is full," Greg explained. The attendant just shrugged. "All right, well, don't bring it back here next time. You'll have to go to the other location for that stuff." And that's when it hit me. We had spent nearly 2 hours trying to get rid of a couch that was still sitting in the back of Greg's truck. We ended up driving back home, defeated. The couch was still there, mocking me. I had wasted my entire Sunday for nothing. As we pulled into the driveway, I looked at Greg and said, "Well, I guess we're not getting rid of it today." "Yeah," Greg replied with a grin, "but at least we've got a funny story for next time." And so, the couch still resides in my living room, waiting for the next attempt to be rid of it. At this point, I've decided that I'm just going to burn it in my backyard and call it a day. Sometimes, you just have to accept that the universe doesn't want you to get rid of your junk. But hey, at least it gave me a story to tell. TIFU by sending a very embarrassing text to my crush that I meant for my friend. So, here's the situation. I'm a 27-year-old guy who has been crushing on this girl from work for months now. We've been friendly, but never anything more than that. Her name is Sarah, and she's got the kind of smile that makes you feel like you just got hit by a truck, not the painful kind, but the I'm in love and everything is right in the world kind of truck. You get it, right? Anyway, I don't have the best track record with women. I'm more of a text first, then panic, and overthink everything kind of guy. My friends are always trying to give me advice, and while I appreciate it, I tend to ignore them.
Why?
Because I always feel like I can do things my own way. That, in hindsight, is never a good idea. So last Friday, Sarah and I ended up in a small group at work after hours for some sort of team-building activity that was really just a ploy to get us to stay late and drink. It was a casual setting, and I was feeling pretty good about how things were going. We talked about work, hobbies, random stuff. It was all going smoothly. At some point, Sarah and I ended up chatting alone in the break room, and I was on cloud 9. We exchanged some laughs, talked about a few things we had in common, and then there was a brief moment of silence. She asked me what I thought about a movie I had mentioned earlier, and I gave her my usual, overly detailed analysis of it. I went into this ridiculous tangent about how the cinematography was amazing, but the plot left a lot to be desired. You know, the kind of stuff that makes me sound like I know what I'm talking about, but is probably just the ramblings of someone who's seen too many movies and not enough sun. She seemed amused, though, so I took that as a good sign. We kept talking for a little while longer, and when it was time to go home, she said something like, "Hey, I had fun talking to you today," and smiled. I was internally jumping for joy because I thought that was a good sign. We exchanged pleasantries, and I gave her my best, "I'm totally chill, nothing to see here," wave as we parted ways. As soon as I got into my car, I was still riding that high. I couldn't stop smiling. My friends had warned me about overanalyzing situations like this, but how could I not? I had actually talked to her, like really talked to her, and it had gone well. At that point, I decided to send my friend Jason a text. Jason and I have been buddies for years, and we're always helping each other out with relationship advice. Or at least he helps me, and I pretend like I know what I'm doing. The conversation went like this. Me? Bro, I think I'm in love with Sarah. I don't know what to do. She's literally perfect. I need help. Jason. Haha bro, relax. You gotta play it cool. Don't overthink it. Just be yourself. Me. I am, but she's so goddamn perfect. I can't stop thinking about her. I just want to impress her, you know? I want her to think I'm cool. Jason, you're overthinking it, dude. Just ask her out for drinks or something casual. Don't make it weird. Me. You're right. I'll text her tomorrow. Thanks, man. Jason. Of course, good luck. Don't mess it up. Feeling pumped, I decided to take Jason's advice. The next day, I was going to send her a casual text and ask her out. But before that, I decided to get some additional advice from another friend of mine, Alex. Alex is the no-filter, say whatever pops into his head type of guy, so I knew he would tell me if I was doing something stupid. I texted him a similar message to the one I had sent Jason, but this time I was a little more dramatic, for effect. Me? Dude, I think I'm in love with Sarah. I don't know how to play this. Alex. Oh man. You've got it bad, huh? Me? I do.
She's perfect.
Like, perfect. What should I do? Alex. Well, first off, stop being a baby. You need to man up. Send her a text like, hey, I'm thinking about you, and see where it goes from there. Me. Are you sure? That's kind of bold, right? Alex. Bold is good. Women love confidence. You've got to let her know you're into her. Don't be a weirdo about it, but show her you care. You got this, bro. I was feeling more confident than ever. This was going to be the moment. The problem was, I was so focused on crafting the perfect message that I didn't realize what I had done. I opened my messaging app, pulled up Sarah's contact, and, without thinking, typed out the exact text Alex had suggested. Hey, I'm thinking about you. But here's the thing. I didn't send it to Sarah. I sent it to Jason. The worst part? I didn't realize this until about 10 minutes later when Jason responded with a simple, what's up? I stared at my phone for what felt like an eternity, then frantically checked the conversation history. My heart sank. I had sent the text to the wrong person, the text I had meant for Sarah, and Jason was the one who received it. I panicked. What was I supposed to do now? I couldn't just let this slide. Jason would think I was a complete mess. I couldn't even imagine the kind of jokes he would make at my expense for the next few weeks. I needed to fix this. Immediately. I started typing, desperately trying to come up with an excuse that wouldn't make me look like a total idiot. But nothing I typed seemed good enough. Every message was either too weird or too vague. I had no choice but to embrace the awkwardness. So I went with, oops, wrong person. That was meant for Sarah. Ignore that. Jason, being the absolute legend that he is, didn't skip a beat. He responded with, dude, you're a mess. But hey, go for it. At least you're being bold. You're lucky I don't have a video of this. LOL. I could feel my face turning bright red, even though I was by myself in my car. So, in a last-ditch attempt to salvage some dignity, I typed, yeah, I'm going to pretend that didn't just happen. Jason replied, I'll let you know how it goes. And then, I did what any rational person would do in this situation. I shut off my phone and tried to forget the entire incident. But deep down, I knew I'd never be able to forget it. The next day, I saw Sarah again at work, and she smiled at me. I smiled back, but it was a weird, nervous smile, like the kind of smile you give to a dog that's been barking at you for hours and you just want it to stop. She didn't mention the text, which was a relief, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that the universe was conspiring against me. I ended up asking her out a couple of weeks later, and to my shock, she said yes. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder if she was just humoring me after seeing me flounder so spectacularly. Either way, I went for it, and we've been going on dates ever since. Moral of the story? Double-check who you're texting before you hit send, especially when you're in a panicked, over-anxious state. You never know when your friends will have to make you the butt of the joke for the next few years. I never thought a simple trip to the grocery store could spiral into a full-blown disaster. But here I am, trying to process the events that unfolded last Saturday, and I still can't stop cringing. It all started innocently enough, but by the end, I was facing the consequences of my own stupidity. Let's just say that if there were an award for most embarrassing day ever, I'd be holding that trophy high. It was a typical Saturday morning. I woke up to the sun shining through the blinds and the faint sound of birds chirping outside. I decided to make a list of the things I needed to pick up from the grocery store. My fridge had been practically empty for days, and I had been living off cereal and takeout for way too long. I had a few essentials in mind: milk, eggs, bread, and a couple of things I needed for dinner that night. I wasn't planning on anything special, just a quick, routine grocery run. I grabbed my keys, wallet, and phone and set out. The store was just a few blocks away, so I walked. The weather was pleasant and I was in a good mood, so I figured it was going to be a relatively normal trip. Once I got to the store, I grabbed a cart and started walking up and down the aisles. I had made a mental list of the things I needed, so I was moving quickly. I didn't even glance at the other customers, just focusing on getting what I needed. It was an uneventful, mundane shopping experience. Then I reached the dairy section. I reached for a gallon of milk, but as I was bending down, I felt something unusual. It wasn't a pain, but more like a light pressure in my stomach. It was subtle at first, but it quickly intensified into an uncomfortable bloating feeling. I stood up, confused, and tried to ignore it, but it wouldn't go away. I didn't want to look weak or make a scene, so I grabbed my milk and continued on with my shopping, trying to push through the discomfort. As I walked to the next aisle, I started to feel a distinct rumble in my stomach. My body was clearly trying to tell me something. I stopped dead in my tracks, feeling a cold sweat form on the back of my neck. I knew what was coming, and I knew it wasn't going to be pretty. I started power walking toward the bathroom, but every step felt like a countdown. I could already feel the pressure building up, and the closer I got to the bathroom, the more I regretted not listening to my body earlier. The rumbling was becoming louder, and at this point, I was practically running toward the bathroom. I made it just in time. I burst through the door, and thankfully, the stall was empty. I didn't even bother locking the door before I quickly sat down and, well, the floodgates opened. For about a minute, it felt like my insides were trying to escape. I have no idea how something so simple as a grocery store trip turned into this, but I was genuinely praying I wouldn't pass out from the sheer force of it all. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to finish up. I leaned back against the toilet, trying to regain my composure. I was sweating, but I could finally breathe again. My stomach still felt a bit off, but the worst seemed to be over. Or so I thought. As I stood up to leave the stall, I looked down and froze. I could not believe what I saw. There was a literal mess. Everywhere. It wasn't just the toilet, it was all over the floor, on the walls, and somehow even on the back of the door. I had no idea how it happened, but the blast of it all had gone. Well, let's just say it went far beyond my expectations. In a complete panic, I froze. My mind raced as I tried to figure out what to do. I knew I couldn't just leave it like this. I wasn't the kind of person who could casually walk out of a situation like this. But at the same time, I didn't know how I was going to clean it up. I looked around for anything that might help, paper towels, tissues, anything. There was nothing. I stood there for what felt like forever, weighing my options. I could try to clean it up, but I had no idea how. And to be honest, the thought of facing that level of humiliation made me want to crawl into a hole and never come out. Finally, I decided to call for help. I pulled out my phone and texted my friend, who works at the store part-time. "Hey, I'm in the bathroom. Something went terribly wrong. Can you help?" I hit send, immediately regretting it. This wasn't just an embarrassing situation, it was an emergency. To my relief, my friend responded quickly. "Are you okay? I'll be right there." I waited, trying to clean up as best I could with the few supplies I could find. It was awkward and incredibly uncomfortable. I couldn't even look at the mess anymore. Every time I tried to get closer to it, I nearly gagged. It was bad. Really bad. Finally, my friend arrived. I was so relieved to see them, but also mortified. They took one look at the scene and immediately stepped in, expertly cleaning up the mess. I can't tell you how thankful I was that they were willing to help me, but the guilt was still eating me alive. This was not how I'd ever imagined my Saturday morning going. When they finished, they gave me a stern look and said, "You're lucky I like you." I couldn't even respond. I just muttered a quick thank you and quickly left the bathroom, making a beeline for the exit. My dignity was in shambles, and I knew I had to get out of there before I became the subject of gossip at the store. I didn't even bother finishing my shopping. I walked home in a daze, trying to process everything that had just happened. The worst part was, as much as I wanted to forget it, I knew I wouldn't be able to. There was no way I could ever step foot in that store again without everyone knowing exactly what I had done. That night, I stayed home and ordered takeout. I couldn't bring myself to cook anything after the day I'd had. I'll never look at grocery stores or bathrooms the same way again. I've learned my lesson. Listen to your body and always be prepared for the worst. And if you ever find yourself in a situation like this, well, you might want to consider a backup plan for your emergency exit strategy. Anyway, That was the most embarrassing day of my life, and it's safe to say I'll never forget it. I've always been a huge fan of cooking and trying new recipes. I've always considered myself somewhat of a culinary aficionado, especially when it comes to experimenting with spices. I love adding a little extra heat, a sprinkle of this, a dash of that. My friends and family always ask me for recipes, and they even praise my skills on social media. So, naturally, when I was given the opportunity to host a dinner party at my house, I took it as an opportunity to show off my culinary prowess. The plan was simple. I'd make a 5-course meal that would knock everyone's socks off. I knew my guests would expect a spread of appetizers, a savory main course, and a decadent dessert. Of course, I couldn't just make any ordinary meal. I needed to get creative. After a little research and digging through my spice cupboard, I decided that I would make a Middle Eastern-inspired dinner, incorporating lots of bold flavors like cumin, coriander, turmeric, and, of course, chili peppers. I had a few recipes in mind, but I also wanted to throw in a surprise dish of my own creation to really showcase my mastery of the culinary arts. Fast forward to the day of the dinner party. I woke up early to get everything prepped. The house smelled like a spice bazaar, with the intoxicating scents of roasted cumin and garam masala wafting through the air. I was feeling confident as I worked my way through the various dishes, checking my list, ensuring I had everything I needed. The appetizers, a mix of baba ganoush, hummus, and freshly made pita, were coming together perfectly. The main course, a spiced lamb tajin with apricots and almonds, was simmering on the stove, and I was about to start assembling a side dish of roasted cauliflower and chickpeas with a yogurt tahini sauce. It was around this time that my friends started arriving. Everyone was in high spirits, chatting about their day, complimenting my house, and the wonderful smells wafting through the air. I felt a sense of pride swelling in my chest. This was going to be the best dinner party ever. As the last few guests trickled in, I decided to quickly assemble the surprise dish I'd been planning, a spicy chocolate mousse. I thought it was a genius idea, rich, velvety chocolate combined with a hint of heat from chili flakes. It was bold and unexpected, and I knew it would be the perfect ending to an incredible meal. I set to work making the mousse. I melted the chocolate and carefully mixed in the cream, eggs, and sugar. Then, with a sense of satisfaction, I added the chili flakes. I didn't want it to be too spicy, just enough of a kick to surprise people. I stirred the mousse, tasted it, and nodded approvingly. It had a subtle heat that would surely catch people off guard. I then filled little cups with the mousse, topping them with a sprinkle of chili flakes for decoration, and placed them in the fridge to set. Perfect. With the main course nearly done, I decided to take a breather and mingle with my guests. The appetizers were a hit. Everyone was enjoying the lamb tajin, and the conversation was flowing. I was absolutely beaming with pride. This dinner was turning out just as I had envisioned. As we moved to the dessert course, I announced that I had a special surprise: spicy chocolate mousse. My friends, intrigued by the unusual combination, eagerly dug in. I watched with a proud smile as they took their first bites. And then it happened. I saw one of my friends, Sarah, freeze mid-bite. She blinked, her face scrunching up in confusion. Then, without warning, she gasped and choked, desperately waving her hand. My heart sank as I realized something was horribly wrong. She sputtered, gasping for air, and I rushed to her side. "Are you okay? What's wrong?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. I can't breathe," she gasped between coughs, her face flushed. I instantly thought of the worst-case scenario. Was she allergic to something in the mousse? I didn't think I had used any nuts or dairy that would be an issue, but I hadn't asked her about allergies before. But no, it wasn't that. She managed to calm down enough to get a few words out. It's so spicy. It burns." I was shocked. The mousse was supposed to have a hint of spice, a subtle heat. I had never considered the possibility that it could be that hot. But as Sarah took another breath and started to recover, I could see that the situation was quickly escalating. My other guests, too, had taken a bite of the mousse and were now starting to react. A few were laughing it off, but I could see the discomfort on their faces. One friend, Mark, even dashed to the sink, clutching his throat and desperately trying to wash the heat away. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had severely overestimated the amount of chili flakes I added. In fact, I had completely misjudged the heat level of the chili flakes I had used. I had grabbed a jar of particularly potent dried chili flakes that I had forgotten about from a previous chili experiment. The heat was so intense that it was bordering on inedible. I had essentially served everyone a dessert version of a fiery pepperoni pizza. As the minutes ticked by, things went from bad to worse. One of my friends had turned bright red and was sipping water like it was going out of style. Another was desperately trying to fan their mouth with a napkin, their eyes watering uncontrollably. Everyone was in pain, and I felt a mix of horror and embarrassment wash over me. I had completely ruined the evening's finale. At this point, Sarah had recovered enough to speak clearly, though she was still fanning herself. "I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to look at chocolate the same way again," she joked weakly, but I could tell she was still struggling. I quickly scrambled to find some kind of relief. I offered milk, ice cream, and bread, but it was clear that I had made a massive mistake. The chocolate mousse, which had been intended to be a surprising and indulgent treat, had turned into a cruel joke. Everyone was still trying to recover from the burning sensation in their throats, and I felt mortified. I had gone from culinary hero to the villain of my own dinner party. Despite my attempts to salvage the evening, the damage was done. The dinner party, which had started so promisingly, ended on a sour note. People began leaving early, still nursing their spicy dessert wounds, and I was left standing in the kitchen, utterly defeated. Later that night, as I cleaned up, I reflected on the disaster. My attempt to elevate the meal with a spicy surprise had backfired spectacularly. I had tried to be clever, but in doing so, I had alienated my guests and ruined what was supposed to be a fun and memorable evening. The next day, I posted an apology to my friends on social media, accompanied by a photo of the offending mousse. "Lesson learned," I wrote. "Next time, I'll stick to what I know and avoid turning dessert into a torture device." To this day, the spicy chocolate mousse remains one of my most infamous cooking failures. But at least I can look back and laugh about it now, well, sort of. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.